Hi everyone, and welcome to our webinar today. And we will talk about climate change education from cross-cultural perspectives. And firstly, I just like to mention that this webinar is being recorded and will be shared with you in a week later by email, so you can watch back the recording if you wish. And we also provide a package of education resources facilitate your research. And during the webinar, if you have any questions during the webinar, please feel free to leave us a message on the QA board, and our panelists will answer in QA session after all the speakers. And there will be lots of great topics to discuss today, so let's dive in and welcome our panelists. And first of all, we welcome Professor Junqing Zhai from the School of Education at Zhejiang University, and his research focuses on science learning in informal outdoor settings. Teachers practice in inquiry-based science classrooms and pedagogies for connecting children with nature. We also have Professor Justin Delong from the University College London and guest speaker at Zhejiang University, China. And his research interests are in learning in and outside the classroom, climate change, and sustainability education. And Professor Val Dawson from Science Education in the Graduate School of Education at the University of Western Australia. And her research interests include scientific literacy, pre-service science teacher education, argumentation and decision-making, critical thinking, social scientific issues, and teaching in disadvantaged schools. And Professor Lizette Robles from the University of Guadalajara, and her research focuses on sociological and cultural aspects of disclosed in the teaching and learning of science, especially in multilingual contexts and socio-environmental aspects related to environmental health, specifically climate change literacy. And Professor Alexandra Martinez from the Georgia Southern University's Middle Grades and Secondary Education Department, and his research focuses on formal and informal science education and explores how the educational system is positioned by contextual mitigating factors. Professor Lauren Maiden from the College of New Jersey, and her current work focuses directly on climate change education. And we also have Efrant Ilam, Associate Professor of Science Education at the Institute of Sustainable Industries and Livable Cities at Victoria University in Melbourne. And we also have Halima Ibrahim, Partner Success Executive for Open Access from Sage, and who will introduce Sage Open Access at the end of the webinar. So once again, welcome all of you today, and kindly note that this webinar is being recorded and will be shared after this session. So let's come to the first topic. Welcome Professor Junqing Zhai, Professor Val Dawson, and Professor Justin Dallon to talk about climate change education cross-cultural perspectives.
Hello, everyone. My name is Junqing Zhai, a faculty member of Zhejiang University in China. Thanks very much for coming to joining us this webinar. Well, it's truly an honor for me to serve as one of the guest editors for this special issue. I want to take a moment to express my deep gratitude for this opportunity to work alongside such renowned scholars and learn from all of you. Being involved in this issue has been a rewarding experience, and I'm very thankful to ECNU Review of Education for giving me this platform to engage with important discussions on climate change education. Well, I'm very excited to introduce this special issue, which focuses on climate change education from a cross-cultural perspective. This theme is crucial in today's academic and policy discussions. And the 5 articles included offer valuable insights into the complexity of climate change education. First, we have Dr. Sylvia Lizeth Ramos de Robles and her team who explore how climate change education can assist dairy farmers in Mexico adapt to climate change. Their work emphasizes blending local knowledge with scientific insights, enabling farmers to understand climate risks and develop practical solutions. Next, Professor Lauren Madden and her colleagues share insights into New Jersey, where they investigate parents' views on new climate change education standards. They found that the most parents discuss climate change with their children, many feel underprepared and highlight the need for better resources and the communication between schools and families. And Dr. Efrat Ilam, who critically examines the challenges in designing effective climate change curricula. She argues for a more structured and scientifically rigorous approach, separate from broader educational frameworks to enhance local adaptability. In Chile, Dr. Veronica Abasto and colleagues investigate knowledge gaps among teachers regarding climate change. Her findings reveal that both pre-service and in-service teachers lacked adequate understanding, highlighting the urgent need for reform in teacher training programs. Finally, Drs. Sophia Zhang and Elena Silverman take a philosophical approach, focusing on how urban high school students can connect climate change to their lived experiences. Unfortunately, the contributors of the last two papers couldn't join us today due to a last-minute commitment. But if you are interested in their papers, please feel free to visit the ECNU Review of Education Journal's website. All the articles are open access, so you can download and read them for free anytime. Thank you.
And hello, my name is Justin Dillon, and it's a great pleasure to be part of this panel. I work at the Centre for Climate Change and Sustainability Education at IOE, which is University College London's Faculty of Education and Society. But I'm currently speaking to you from the National Institute of Education, which is in Singapore, and they very kindly appointed me visiting professor, the CJ Co visiting professor, and I'm here for 2 weeks, and I'm delighted to be here. I want to thank Junqing for the invitation. This special issue I think dates back at least 2 years. Before I was working at UCL, I was working at Exeter. But I've known Junqing for a long time, and he approached me and said, would you like to be one of the editors of this special issue of the review? And it's turned out to be an excellent thing to do, really, because it's brought together a whole range of people, some of whom I know and have known for a long time, some of whom I haven't known for very long. I mean, clearly, this is a hugely important issue, an increasingly important issue. And it's important that a diverse group of scholars, that people from all over the world are able to give voice to their research and to share ideas. And so I commend Junqing and the publisher Sage for putting this together. And always a pleasure to work with Vale, who I've known for donkey's years. So Vale, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Justin. You're making us sound old, but we're not. Look, I'm coming today from Perth, Western Australia, which thankfully is the same time zone as Singapore, Beijing, and I have been told 1/3 of the world's population is in our time zone. I'd like to thank the journal, ECNU, for the foresight and the opportunity to have a special issue on cross-cultural approaches to climate change. And I also want to acknowledge the speakers today and the authors who aren't able to be here. I had the pleasure of reading all of the papers, and I think the thing that struck me, apart from the quality, was the breadth of topics that came up, and I think you're going to hear that very much today in the speakers. And I have to say, and I've spent donkey's years researching climate change education in Western Australia and reading, and I believe that this issue has really broadened my perspective on the types of research, but also the approach that we take. So thank you to Sage and the journal for making this possible. I'd like to just conclude with just a small fact. And this morning I was sort of thinking, why is this topic important? And I have prepared a slide, but I'm not going to show that. I just want to tell you one fact. So because of climate change, we're increasingly having wildfires, bushfires in Australia, and of course also in California and Canada, etc. And we had one in 2020. It was one of our worst summers on record. And I recently read a report that stated that 3 billion animals perished in New South Wales and Victoria in that wildfire. And they didn't just make up the figure, they actually did pre and post sort of tests of habitats. And those animals were all vertebrates, so they were only able to consider reptiles, mammals, and birds. So if you take that sort of devastation into account, sometimes we focus on the effect of climate change on ourselves, but we as stewards of this world have a responsibility for all living organisms. So I just was really struck by that figure. So that's all I would like to say. Really looking forward to this morning, and I'll go back to the chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Jai, Professor Dillon, and Professor Dawson for the wonderful sharing. And now let's move on to the next part, and we'll welcome Professor Lizette Roberts and Professor Alejandra Martinez to share climate change education as an adaptive strategy for dairy farm as a social culture perspective.
Let me try to put them. I want to put the complete screen, but are you seeing my screen and are you listening to me? Okay, thank you. I'm very nervous because, as you know, English is not my native language, so it's an effort to me to share the results of this research. First, I would like to thank the organizers of this seminar for the opportunity to share the research experience development and recently published in ECNU Review of Education. Thank you to the West editors for this project. Our research is about how to design climate change education in informal setting as an adaptive strategy for dairy farmers using a sociocultural perspective in which local knowledge is essential and a very important issue. This study had twofold purpose. The first was attend to dairy farmers, and the second, how can science education meet a community needs? This is a joint effort between University of Guadalajara and Georgia Southern University.
Lizette, sorry, could you click on full screen, please?
I was trying to do it, but I can.
No, it's the bottom. Yeah, the bottom of the little
Yes,
little.
I know that is in the bottom, but I can, because I have the Zoom screen and I don't know how to move. Let me try to. Okay. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. So, as you know, climate change is considered the main environmental problem. In this sense, a series of lines of research have arisen with the aim of addressing both globally and local the problems associated with it. Mitigation and adaptation are two major fields from which the problem have been addressed. In our case, or in this case, we present focus on adaptation and its relationship with vulnerability. In order to study issues associated with climate change, it's important for us to identify the characteristics and asymmetries with which climate change may manifest itself in each locality. For instance, considering some aspects like poverty levels, economic dependence of climate change, sensitive activities, sensitivity of ecosystem and biodiversity, and finally, the little information and research at the local level. In our case, we analyze the impact of climate change on milk production in a community in the state of Jalisco, Mexico. As you know, Mexico is highly vulnerable to climate change because in Mexico, we have a lot of economic dependence activities on climate change. And because in Mexico, there are high levels of poverty and little information and research about that. The state of Jalisco, when we do this research, is leader in food production in Mexico. Jalisco produces 25% of the food production at the national level. The effects of climate change analyzed from the vulnerability approach depend on two main aspects: the vulnerability of the system of the organism exposed to climate change condition and the change, and the type of exposure and sensitivity of the organism system. However, that is on the surface because complicated economic activity is the intersectionality of parallel sociocultural conditions, such as tradition or perception of climate change, which can increase this vulnerability. Our study is the product of the group or project between universities and the government who have developed research to support communities vulnerable to climate change. When we research in the university, share the necessities with the government, we identified that not only climate change education in schools was necessary, even though we have to work with these communities which really was vulnerable, like dairy farmers. In this paper, we offer the result of a transdisciplinary study on the importance of using the local knowledge to cultivate adaptive action to climate change and reduce the vulnerability of affected communities. The case analyzed was that of a small community of cow milk producers in Jalisco, specifically in Encarnación de Díaz, Jalisco, Mexico. Our research was framed by the belief that a community knowledge is based on the traditional, historical, and cultural ways of interacting with this environment. So this means that developing a value and practical climate change education curriculum in an informal setting that is contextualized by understanding the local knowledge and using this local knowledge to produce these educative strategies. We incorporate two main activities. The first one, a sustainable rural livelihood framework to access 6 types of capital to determine the adaptive capacity of milk producers, and for the other side, using a transdisciplinary approach, we develop an informal education activities of climate change, focusing specifically on reducing vulnerability and increasing the adaptive capacity. As you can see, we use this theoretical framework so that we use this to the design of climate change education strategy, and we learn the importance of local diagnosis that make it possible to identify a specific risk and offer appropriate knowledge, skills, and behaviors to reduce this vulnerability. As you can see, you can see all the 6 kinds of capital and their compounds that we evaluate to determine the adaptive capacity. These are our participants. We work with 61 participants. Only one of them were women. All of them were small dairy farmers. From 50 to 80 years was the average age. More than 50% of the participants, they only have elementary education. And although they feel healthy, their physical strength has decreased because most of them work more than 8 hours a day. Methodological, we use a mixed research method for the development of this study. First, we make a diagnosis and we use semi-structured interviews and Likert scale survey. And these were the base to, this information were the main information we use to developing the climate change education curriculum. Some part of our results about the main capitals that we assess, we can see that in the case of animal capitals, we identify the temperature for dairy cows is a very important, and especially when temperature is more than 21 degrees Celsius. However, 66% of the participants do not have any shade near to the barn for their cattle, and the maximum temperatures are increasing in this community. The financial capital of producers in Encarnación de Díaz is larger affected by climate change because they are affected by mainly for the food prices, because the food prices have increased, especially when they are reduced. According to the human capital, in this human capital, we include local knowledge. We know that most of the participants do not know really what does climate change mean or what are the main phenomena to associate with climate change. For the natural capital of Encarnación de Díaz is very vulnerable because the increase of occurrence and intensity of extreme events derived from climate change. Specifically, drought was the factor that most affected livestock production. For the case of physical capital of Encarnación de Díaz producers, this includes monitoring and measuring in their infrastructure, particularly the stables that require refrigeration system to cope with high temperatures, which is 96% lack of this kind of infrastructure. But the case of sociocultural capital, cattle rancher is developing empirical knowledge and exploration based on locally produced experience. Over the time, the use of this research began to be transmitted from generation to generation. Even though the new generation, we can see that most of them, they are not interested in continue with this kind of production. In this diagram, who is the product of the Likert scale analysis, we can see the summary of the analysis carried out by the Likert scale, where sensitivity and exposure are evaluated on a scale to 1 to 5, 5 being the highest. For example, in the case of natural capital, there is a high degree to exposure as well as the sensitive. They have 4 in both, followed by human and animal capital. The details of each element evaluated can be reviewed in the article, as same as the other one of the capitals. For the design of the educational strategy to increase the capacity of dairy farmers, we use a sociocultural approach. We consciously sought a sociocultural approach to document how diverse social groups cope with the effects of adversity of climate change. Given the complexity of climate change, we believe that climate change education should take in account a transdisciplinary and holistic approach, as advocated by Kellontine, who recognized that climate change knowledge has recently been viewed as a complex, as a multidimensional and dynamic system rather than as a collection of facts and concepts for climate change. It is important for us to include the knowledge of different participants, especially the participants who are affected of the inhabitants of these communities. Based on the knowledge of this transdisciplinary, holistic, and a complexity, we propose a co-production strategies for the climate change education model for milk producers. We developed a series of focus group sessions were conducted and analyzed the initial CCE curriculum draft and a new climate change education was generated based on the local knowledge with the aim to increase adaptive capacity. So these are some photographies or picture when we, like a research, work together with the dairy farmers and we share the information that they provide us through the interviews, through the Likert scale. We analyze the results and we all together construct the new climate change education strategy. The foundation of the development of climate change education curriculum was through the data collection, and we worked together to understand what was the main problems and the main capital who was vulnerable to climate change. We designed the new adaptive capacity strategy in terms of their livelihood. Identified and considering dairy farmers' experiential and knowledge was essential to the educational materials designed to the negotiation of what climate change academic finds will and will not work for the participants. In this kind of session, we learn together. Our main conclusion is that a contextually situated transdisciplinary process approach was used to encourage the development of climate change curriculum and strategy, so that the design of educational strategies for climate change was based on the critical aspects of small milk produces vulnerability and adaptive capacity. How we approach the climate change education in this project could add a value to educational efforts grounded in the socio-environmental problem, participant knowledge bank, and scientific context. For us, the critical decision in implementing our project was not to allow scientific content to justify or override the local knowledge of dairy farmers, their traditional, historical, and cultural ways of interacting with the environment. So in conclusion, this study found that developing a value and practical climate climate change education program in an informal setting must be contextualized by understanding local knowledge, and recognizing this led to mutual negotiate climate change education curriculum respective to local and scientific knowledge, resulting in a viable and practical program to increase the capacity for the milk producer sectors of Encarnación de Díaz to adapt to climate change. So we think that developing a value and practical climate change education program in an informal setting must be contextualized by understanding the local knowledge. As you can see here, there are some of the flyers and different kind of material that we made together with the dairy farmers, and we distribute all this information with all the community and all the dairy farmer producers. They help us to make these main points who help to take a better decision in the activity. So we make this like a early warm calendar. Then they use thermometer to make measure about the temperature and identify what are the days that has stress by the cows. Thank you very much for listening this presentation, and all the research you can read it in the article.
Yeah, I would like to finish this with, would like to leave everyone with one thought. And if there is one idea you take from this article, is that we did not justify or supersede local knowledge with scientific knowing. In other words, we listened and asked questions to learn not to judge what the dairy farmers knew. This led to a climate change education effort that they could identify with and could able to put into useful practice. And I think this notion of local, what does a person know, is critical for us expanding the idea of or understanding why so many people are deniers today about climate change. They simply cannot identify with it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Professor. And I saw there is a raised hand, but if you have any questions during the webinar, please write down your questions in the QA section, and we will answer your question at the end of the webinar. And let's move on to Professor Lauren Maiden, who will talk about parents' perspectives on climate change education.
So hi, everyone. Thank you again for inviting me to this wonderful session. I've learned so much by reading these papers, but it was so nice to hear the presentation as well. And I love the emphasis on local knowledge and everyday knowledge, and that sort of overlaps just a tiny bit with some of my work. I'm going to share my screen. Let me get this ready. And can everyone see the slide? Yes. So this is work I did in partnership with a large group of people. This is certainly not mine alone. And we focus on understanding parents' perspectives on climate change education. So my work is based in New Jersey. Just to give you a little bit more context of why we're focusing on just such a small part of the United States. In 2020, this scientific report on climate change came out, and we found that it was found that New Jersey experiences disproportionate impacts of climate change relative to other parts of the U.S. So some key findings of this scientific report found that sea level may rise up to another 1.5 feet. That's about half a meter. Huge increases in rainfall by 2050, longer and higher temperature heat waves, increased ocean acidification, changes in bird migration patterns. We're seeing that a lot right now, and that includes birds that travel the entire east coast of the American continent. increase in drought conditions and decreased air and water quality. And one thing we know is that these effects will harm children and those in our most vulnerable communities at disproportionate rates. So some of the things we're seeing these days, when I was a child, we had snow days home from school when it was too snowy to drive to school. This last school year, we had rain days. There were schools that were closed for weeks on end because of flooding in Paterson, New Jersey. My own children had their winter concert canceled at school because of rain, and it was unsafe to expect parents to come and go to the school to walk in those conditions. So we're really seeing things that are unusual that we haven't seen much before. So you'll see even at the veterinarian's office, my vet had a sign up the other day that they're recommending pets have flea and tick and heartworm preventative year round rather than just in the seasons when they're outside a lot in the heat, because we're not seeing a die down in flea and tick populations. Which is really sort of unusual. And the picture on the right-hand side is my own kids. About a year and a half ago, we were experiencing the effects of the Canadian wildfires, which is something that never happens thousands of miles away. My son wore swim goggles to the bus stop, and we had leftover masks from the COVID days because being outside was simply impossible for more than 10 minutes at a time. So in 2020, our state's first lady announced that New Jersey would be the first state in the US to include climate change education across K-12 settings. So New Jersey was already a next generation science standards state. For anyone familiar with that system, that means starting in middle school, starting at age 11, climate change content was included in science classes. What the First Lady's announcement did was expand climate instruction to include all subject areas as well as all ages. So children from as young as age 5 were going to be learning about climate change in school. And this announcement came without much information with regard to how teachers would be supported in providing this sort of learning for their students. It was a new topic for everyone. The mathematics and English language arts standards came a year later, and that just has to do with adoption schedules within the state. I know something that's a little bit unusual in the US is that we've got 50 separate sets of standards for 50 separate states, which makes things quite complicated. But this was quite a change from what we expected to happen. We were really happy about this. First Lady Tammy Murphy worked with the Al Gore and the Climate Reality Project before her husband became governor of our state, and this was something near and dear to her heart. So for those outside of the US, which is most of the audience, it's extremely unusual for a state's first lady to have any sort of impact on policy at all, let alone educational policy. So why parents' perspectives then, right? I'm a teacher educator. I work with teachers. I do a lot of work with future teachers as well as in professional learning. But where does the parent's perspective come in? Children seek information from trusted messengers. So when children learn about new things at school, they often go home and try and validate that information with the adults in their life who they know and trust. And we know from research that intergenerational conversations about climate change can increase concern and actions across generations. Something that's interesting there, the two studies I cited there, from the Lawson et al. Study, that found that young people were able to influence their parents' and grandparents' actions and behaviors. The Hu and Chen article found the opposite, that grandparents' and parents' behaviors were able to impact young children. So we know that these conversations go both ways. Something else that was quite interesting, Kamenetz did a report for NPR. So this was not a research study, but a news study that found that 80% of parents believed that climate change should be taught in schools, but they also were fairly certain teachers were unprepared in this area. So this really sort of begged the question, if our state was going to take on this monumental task of including climate change content across the board, what were parents' perspectives on how they were going to support children, how were they going to support what's happening in schools, and how those types of new things that were going to be happening in the classroom might be unpacked at home. So We found also a really interesting study that recently came out of a medical journal that 80% of parents wanted to talk about health impacts of climate change during well visits with pediatricians, yet only 4% did. So this is something that is a big concern on parents' minds. And I know that climate anxiety among parents of young children in particular is something that guides a lot of our actions. And they really need a bit of a blueprint as to where to go. So really, we just had this one research question. What are parents' perspectives on compulsory climate change education across grade levels and subjects? We recruited participants via a number of different listservs and social media posts to complete a survey during October and November of 2022. We did not ask any demographic questions other than whether they had children enrolled in public schools in New Jersey, which grade level of where those children were at, and what county they lived in. I should note that in the US, public schools means state schools. It does not mean privately tuition paid schools. The reason why we did this was we wanted to emphasize only parent perspective, and we didn't want to separate out by race, ethnicity, gender, or socioeconomic status. We wanted to keep it really clearly just the perspective of parents broadly. We agree wholeheartedly that context matters, especially when we're talking from a climate justice orientation. But here we wanted to try and isolate just one factor where possible. So there were some closed-ended items related to climate change topics discussed at home, tools used to talk with children about climate change, and strategies for helping children answer questions about climate change. And then some open-ended items about whether parents respond differently to questions based on children's age. What are some ways they might anticipate talking about climate instruction happening at home? And the reason for that question was we know that it would likely be a different kind of conversation than it would be about fractions or spelling words, right? But would it be a different kind of conversation than talking about the Black Lives Matter movement, for example? You know, what types of things are parents doing to help unpack these types of school activities at home? What questions and concern they had, and what sort of support or tools they would like related to climate change education. So we had about 83 parents respond. I should say this was sort of the end of the time when people were used to filling out a lot of surveys during the lockdown periods. People were getting a little bit of survey fatigue. They represented 12 of New Jersey's 21 counties, so we had a broad geographic range of folks who responded. In our paper, we described some of the numerical trends that emerged, and we used an inductive process to code some of the responses and talk about some themes. For each item that we coded, two coders discussed each item and discussed discrepancies until a consensus was reached. So in terms of topics discussed at home, some of the most common ones to come about were climate-related news events, plants, animals, and non-living things near their homes and schools, and individual or household actions that can be taken to reduce the carbon footprint. Interestingly, things like technological and scientific advances to reduce negative impacts were not necessarily discussed. Neither was youth activism with the same, or change of policies with the same level of popularity, which is sort of interesting that the places where we can think about action and solution building were not necessarily the focus. When asked about what sort of tools were used, most parents did say they use their own knowledge of climate change, but others did suggest things like looking at informational resources in terms of books or websites and things like that. Fewer of them talked about visiting exhibits or asking a teacher or scientist. So any planned shifts in the types of discussions they hope to have at home? And the biggest planned shift we heard about was supporting school activities. So discussing what the kids were learning in their classrooms at school, and asking kids direct questions about their activities. So some further concerns that emerged. Parents were concerned about the political nature of climate change and how conservative teachers might approach the topic. They were also concerned about whether teachers would have adequate resources and knowledge. This echoes what teachers themselves said in an earlier study that our group did. And parents might worry that the topic might be treated superficially or without adequate support. So it might be seen as box checking to watch this quick video about climate change and then it's done, right? And parents were also concerned about inciting eco-anxiety in their children. How do you teach them about the climate crisis without creating youth eco-anxiety? And I think that's interesting because some of the numerical trends we saw earlier were that they were not talking about scientific or technological solutions, or the type of youth activism that can often offset some of that eco-anxiety. So I suppose that those are the marching orders, right? So the types of support parents wanted, they wanted some supplemental education materials. They wanted suggestions for actions they could take at home or as a family. They wanted more information about what's being covered at school. And a small number did say that they wanted some more support for the teachers in terms of professional learning and curricular resources. So some big takeaways. Schools need resources to support the children in learning. We are learning this together was a common sentiment we heard from parents. Professional learning should be inclusive of communities, including parents, to ensure that this adoption builds in a realistic and a meaningful way. And they really wanted some strategies for developmentally appropriate yet accurate conversations. So what we're learning, other states have followed New Jersey's lead. So Connecticut, Maine, and California all have statewide initiatives underway. All have taken very different paths than New Jersey. And New York and Illinois are also in the process of presenting bills for their legislation. Being mindful of the ways in which parents can play a role in climate change education is really critical for an effective rollout. So thank you so much to everyone who generously gave their responses. We are going to try and follow up this study with some focus groups of parents now that we're a few years into implementation, and see whether trends have stayed the same or some new themes emerged. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Professor Maiden. And next topic is interrogating climate change education, identifying Henry's to curriculum development as scheduling conflict. Professor Efrat Ilam, unable to attend today's session in person, and she prepared a video recording to talk about this topic. So let's watch the video together.
The aim of this presentation is to examine epistemologically some taken for granted conceptions concerning climate change education with the aim of supporting climate change curriculum development. The title of the presentation is Interrogating Climate Change Education Epistemology, Identifying Hindrances to Curriculum Development. Educational policymakers today are facing the unprecedented challenge of having the responsibility to teach students about the imminent and unavoidable climate change calamities, while at the same time bearing the responsibility for students' well-being and flourishing. To the best of knowledge, never in educational history such a challenge was put at the feet of curriculum developers. This presentation aims to support climate change curriculum development by examining two critical hindrances and paths to developing an effective curriculum. Specifically, I apply an epistemological approach for interrogating the effectiveness of implementing the cross-curriculum approach in climate change education and the application of climate change education within the framework of education for sustainable development. The majority of publications addressing climate change education seem to agree on one thing, that climate change is multi, inter, or cross-disciplinary. While the epistemological descriptor multidisciplinary conveys the idea that the knowledge is derived from multiple sources, this descriptor forms hindrance for effective climate change curriculum development in two ways. First, by giving the false impression that we have characterized the body of knowledge where in effect we have not. Secondly, by providing a conceptual springboard for the misinformed conclusion, assuming that if climate change is multidisciplinary, then it follows that climate change needs to be taught in multiple disciplines. Concerning the first hindrance, characterizing climate change as multidisciplinary is epistemologically lacking. This is because most knowledge created by humans may be characterized as multidisciplinary. Take, for example, a concept such as photosynthesis. At its narrowest, it involves physics, light energy, chemistry, light energy transformed into chemical energy, and biology, the transformation takes place in proteins. At its broader interpretations, photosynthesis is involved in biogeochemical cycles impacting the climate. The same can be said for most disciplines. They are all multidisciplinary in essence. Biology evolved from zoology and botany, ecology evolved from biology, chemistry, physics, and earth sciences, and so on it goes. Furthermore, characterizing climate change as multidisciplinary is insufficient because it still leaves us with the question of what are the disciplines that make up the multidisciplinary knowledge. Obviously, if there are no disciplines, there is no multidisciplinarity. The second form of hindrance is of particular concern. Here it is assumed that climate change ought to be taught in multiple subjects. This misleading conclusion seems to typify the approaches to climate change education inclusion in the curriculum. For knowledge to be processed effectively, it needs to be systematically structured and organized. The dispersal of climate change across the curriculum leaves students and teachers on their own to collect the fragments and integrate them. The approach also creates challenges to various aspects of teaching and learning. Cross-curricular themes are placed low in the curriculum hierarchy, lacking benchmarks and standards. Such is the case with the sustainability cross-curriculum priority in the Australian curriculum. While the cross-curriculum approach is the most advocated approach for including climate change in the curriculum, empirical evidence suggests that very few countries implement this approach in their curricula, and when they do so, it scarcely filters down into actual implementation. For example, in a review that I conducted examining the New Jersey climate change curriculum, the curriculum proclaims in its introduction that the approach for implementation should be cross-curriculum. However, it was revealed that effectively climate change contents appeared only in two learning areas, in science and in social studies. When addressing the discrepancy between the cross-curriculum advocacy and its poor implementation success, the literature commonly tends to lay the blame on the curricula, on schools, and on teachers for not trying hard enough. However, this lack of success is grounded in educational theories and may be inferred from theories of learning, teacher knowledge, and curriculum theory. In summary, the cross-curriculum approach for implementing climate change education is empirically ineffective and theoretically unsubstantiated. The second hindrance to climate change curriculum development relates to applying climate change education within the framework of Education for Sustainable Development, ESD. UNESCO and other international organizations promote this approach. However, framing climate change within ESD involves three forms of hindrances for effective climate change curriculum development. First, there is an inherent tension between curricular structures and ESD. Secondly, ESD is morally questionable as an agenda for school curriculum. And thirdly, ESD is insufficiently aligned with scientific facts, and I will explain these points. Most curricula present some form of content-based organization, even when they are focused on competencies development. These content-based organizations seem to be at odds with ESD. The roots of ESD are in environmental education. Environmental education was developed in the 1970s as a content-based field. Until the turn of the century, an increasing number of countries included environmental education subjects in their curricula, often entitled environmental studies or environmental science, particularly in secondary schools. In 2002, environmental education was formally displaced by ESD at the World Summit on Sustainable Development in Johannesburg. The years 2005 to 2014 were designated as the Decade of Education for Sustainable Development, and UNESCO was nominated as the lead agency. Since then, ESD evolved under the leadership of UNESCO as a problem-based agenda. The difference between the environmental education content basis and the ESD problem basis is epistemological and relates to the structure and organization of the fields. Content-based fields are organized bodies of knowledge. Problem-based fields have no organization, similar to problems that individuals have throughout the course of life. These are ephemeral and anecdotal. Problems come and go. This difference is at the heart of the tension between ESD and content-based curricula, a tension that did not exist when environmental education was still around. I will elaborate further. A chronological analysis of the ESD framework reveals perpetual conceptual inconsistencies, giving a sense of shifting sands. There are many examples for this. One such example is the replacement of the 15 perspectives constituting the framework of the Decade of Education for Sustainable Development with the 17 Sustainable Development Goals in 2015. It can be seen in the table that except for gender equality, all the other titles have changed. Even climate change is now called climate action. Gonzalez-Bodiano described ESD perspectives as an elusive thematic group of issues where ESD provides an empty space of congregation for the various fields and in turn becomes an empty signifier. There are no rules and regulations that govern the ways in which the empty space is filled, making ESD knowledge ephemeral, anecdotal, with no principles and concepts of organization. Contrarily, climate change has evolved over the past 100 years as an organized body of knowledge with rules for determining claims of truth and well-defined concepts and principles that govern the knowledge production which can be taught through climate change education. For example, we can compare the two concepts in climate change and in sustainable development. In climate change, the term greenhouse gas is defined and governed by the scientific rule of molecular vibration and re-emission of infrared energy. We can make a claim of truth as to whether a substance is a greenhouse gas or not based on whether it follows this rule. In comparison, ESD perspectives and goals are merely incidental assembly of ideas forming part of an agenda or inspiration, such as SDG 16, peace, justice, and strong institutions. The absence of such governing rules and principles of organization is not a minor issue in ESD. Rules determine truthfulness. In the absence of rules, claims of truth cannot be refuted or verified, thus leading to a relativist worldview where all claims are equally valid. Such is the case, for example, when BP, a company responsible for the emission of 340 million tons carbon dioxide equivalents per year, can safely claim on their website that our purpose is reimagining energy for people and our planet. We want to help the world reach net zero and improve people's lives. Under the ESD framework, such claims are not refutable and may be accepted as truth. The epistemological shift from the environmental education content-based field to the ESD problem-based field had profound implications on the stagnation of ESD over the past 30 years since 2002. This is due to the inherent tension between curricular organization around concepts and ESD organization around world transient problems. Quack criticized UNESCO's conceptualization of DSD as turning a robust field of environmental education into a 21st century simulacrum of education for sustainable development, detached from reality, or more precisely, untethered to the planet. She continues to state that it is still unclear whether ESD is meant to be an oriental principle, an actual subject, or an umbrella term encompassing environmental education, climate change education, and other permutations of ecologically oriented principles. Consequently, the inclusion of climate change education within the framework of ESD forms hindrance to climate change curriculum development. The 15 ESD perspectives were abandoned in 2014 at the closure of the Decade of Education for Sustainable Development. Subsequent UNESCO publications increasingly focus on utilizing education for the purpose of societal transformation as an end goal. Priority Action Area 4 describes the means as empowering and mobilizing youth. In the 2020 roadmap, this goal takes a stronger tone with statements such as education needs to transform itself. The roadmap also sets the aim to review the purposes and values that underpin education and reorient all levels of education and learning to contribute to sustainable development. The document further calls for surveillancing education systems and monitoring how well they train students as change agents. Schools and education systems are called upon to reroute their purposes and educational operation modes to serve this agenda. Statements such as these raise a question as to whether it is morally right to allow any agenda to govern and repurpose the curriculum. Many educators may feel alarmed by this apparent attempt to hijack the education systems for achieving a prescribed agenda. This is because many educators share the view of schools as places where children are supported to grow to their full potential, whatever that may be, and not as training facilities for prescribed purposes. Gert Biesta expressed this view by stating that what they, the students, will do when it matters, that is, when they encounter something in their lives that addresses them and calls for them, is something we can never know in advance, which also means that it is fundamentally beyond our control. Furthermore, Biesta suggests that instead of asking what the schools should do for society, which seems to have become the most prominent way in which the task of the school is nowadays being conceived, Biesta asks what society should do for the school so that the school can be a school. Finally, there may be an additional tension between ESD and the scientific consensus. The peak international body representing the well-organized and conceptualized climate change knowledge is undoubtedly the IPCC. However, some evidence suggests that ESD may be getting in the way by muddling the science facts, drifting climate change education away from its evidence-based sources. This may be exemplified by comparing the ways in which the term mitigation is defined by IPCC as compared to its definition within the ESD framework. We can see from the comparison that the ESD version adds a range of unsubstantiated factors and generic slogans to the original IPCC definition. Without delving into the lack of evidence basis, it is sufficient to state here that some of the added claims are not aligned with IPCC and they are controversial at the least. To conclude, the interrogation of climate change epistemology have led to the following conclusions. The cross-curriculum approach for including climate change in the curriculum is the most advocated approach. However, empirical evidence suggests that this approach is not working as well as expected, and there is lack in theoretical basis to support this approach. Climate change needs to be taught independently as a content-based topic, either as a subject in its own right or within the broader environmental contents, as was the case when climate change was taught as a topic of environmental education. ESD agenda seems to be an inappropriate framework for hosting climate change curriculum. The ESD agenda raises a moral question concerning its aim to utilize education for the purpose of societal transformation in what seems to be an attempt to hijack the education systems for achieving its prescribed agenda as an ulterior goal. ESD may be overlaid with unsubstantiated agenda-informed claims. And finally, a quote from Selby and Kagawa: recent calls for the integration of climate change education within mainstream education for sustainable development should be resisted. Thank you very much for listening to this presentation.
Okay, so now let's come to our final session. Welcome Halima Ibrahim, Partner Success Executive for Open Access, to introduce Sage Open Access, and she will also introduce Sage Academic Resources.
Thank you. Okay, so hi, my name is Halima. First of all, thank you to all the speakers for the very insightful sharing session. I've very learned a lot, and I hope everyone has as well. So right now, I would like to share open access publishing that Sage has. My remit mainly covers ANZ market, so there will be points where I will specifically address the Australia and New Zealand market as well. However, if you are not part of the ANZ region, Sage has a lot of transformative agreements that covers open access publishing. So feel free to check with your librarian for more details, or you can go online. We have a page that will actually have all these details as well. Yeah. So just a mission, just a short one. Sage is very have played a very active role in open access because we believe that we should build bridges to knowledge, and we need to actually promote this so that everyone can get the research, can view the research, and is able to play a part in this. Yeah. So how Sage support OA publishing? We have a couple of routes, which is the Goal route, which is our Goal open access publishing journals. We also have the Sage Choice. These are predominantly previously subscription-based journals who now allow open access publishing. And we also have the Green route as well. So if you want more information, you can always go online and read up about it. But yeah. So in order to help you on your publishing journey, maybe you are considering to publish with Sage and you're not sure the things that you can access, we have a journal recommender which helps you to find the right journal. This tool allows you to input relevant keywords, and then the recommender will then provide you with a couple of options that you can consider. So this might help to narrow down your search, because Sage actually has a lot of journals across various disciplines, and you might be only looking for a niche area that you want to publish in. So this will help to reduce the time taken that you might need to actually find the right journal. We also have a Sage Path, which is a service that can help you throughout your publishing journey, from the start all the way to the end. Yeah. We also have the discipline hubs, which you can explore if you want to read special issues like the one we're presented today. You can always go into the right discipline, have a look and see what else is happening in your area of research. We also have authors resources and service. So we have guides, webinars, and even blogs to help you if should you have any questions on how to publish. Furthermore, we have Sage Author Services. So this we offer professional end-to-end support. Some of these are paid because you would be working with professionals, for example, professional editors and stuff like that, to help make sure your research paper meets the format, language, and style requirements of the journal that you are publishing in. Because different journals have different standards, different expectations. So we have these services to help you along as well. Yeah. So how we support such OA publishing is we work with national consortia to develop national level sales deals, which most of your institute should be a part of in your various region. And once you have that consortia level deal, you would then be able to access the Sage Open Access Portal, which is a online portal, online platform that provides a single access point for authors, consortia libraries, and funders to actually have a look. So you can go in, your librarians can also go in and see and help you along your publishing journey. For more information on the various agreements that we have, including the ANZ call agreement, all those across US, UK, and Europe, you can look at our website. Yeah. Specifically for the call agreement, this current agreement is from 2023 to 2025, and it includes unlimited hybrid OA publishing for Sage journals. Some titles are excluded, so we do publish a list of hybrid journals that is included for this particular agreement. And if you decide that you want to publish in our Gold OA journals, there is a 20% discount off the APC or the article processing fee that is being charged. Yeah. So just to share with you that we have a wide range of journals. We obviously very much feature ECNU Review of Education. So they have published that special collection that we've been talking about. So other than that, climate change also affects many topics, as we've seen. So we have journals in various topics like health, politics, and much more that we would cover climate change. And we have published papers from various authors on that topic. Yeah. That's all. Thank you for listening. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. Thank you.
Thank you, Halima. So now let's start the Q&A session. Yeah, can you see my screen? Yeah, so we collect 2 questions from the QA board. And I saw the first session was answered by Lauren, but if you have anything to add on, please feel free to answer. And the second question, I think is asked for all our panelists. So we still have some time to discuss. And if you have any ideas, just feel free to talk about.
Yes, I can jump in and summarize my response that I gave to this this person who asked a question. I don't know how to unpack this at the moment, and I hope that future studies where we can conduct some focus group discussions with a subset of the parents who responded might help us understand a little bit better about why some were unsure regarding what kinds of resources they need. But if I had to to guess or hypothesize at this point, I would say it probably has to do with uncertainty as to what climate change education looks like, particularly for young children. So not really knowing what they need because they're not really sure what the instructional piece would be.
Okay, thanks. And any ideas about the second question?
Before you go to the second question, Professor Madden, do you mind if I expand a little bit on what you said? In the United States, there is a ban the book movement. And so we need to put that on top of the table. And what that means is that there is a political emphasis on the removal of certain books from libraries, schools, etc. And these books are centered around notions of climate change, notions of LGBTQ, et cetera, et cetera. And it's run by an extremely right-wing political organization that, interestingly enough, includes the getting voted into schools, the school boards, people who then are able to establish policy to enact these ban the book and ideas, etc. So thank you for your opportunity, Dr. Professor Madden, Dr. Madden, Professor Madden, Lauren, sorry.
My dad used to say, "You can call me what you like, just don't call me late for dinner."
Got it. I understand.
But yeah, I think with ideas like book banning so prevalent in the US, some parents might be hesitant to know what is happening in school and what kinds of tools they do need.
I don't know if I can share one idea based in the presentation of Professor Lauren. When you say that most of the parents believe that climate change should be taught in schools, in Mexico there is a main difference because a lot of communities are very vulnerable to climate change, and this is a different vision in Mexico because they say that climate change affectation are outside the school, and the many people who have been affected, they are not in the school. For instance, agricultures, dairy farmers, some communities who live near to the river, who increase in different months of the year. So the vision that we have in Mexico when we teach or speak about climate change, that is not an issue only for the formal school, even though it's more important to make some kind of climate change literacy out the school with directly in the community. So we like teacher and research has to go out for the school to the community. So this is a little bit different maybe in Mexico because we are more vulnerable maybe, or because we have a lot of communities have been affected, and this community, they are not studying right now. I don't know.
Okay, thank you. And any other ideas? Okay, so apart from what we talking before, and we also have a great series of resources about education resources facilitate your research. So be sure to scan the QR code and fill the questionnaire and check out on our website. And I think there are some more questions coming up in the Q&A board. So if you can see the questions, we still have time to discuss.
There is a question from an anonymous attendee from the Philippines that I find is an interesting question. If you could put that up, perhaps.
Yeah, wait a moment.
They came out bad. Not that all of the questions are not interesting. I just particularly focused on this one.
About
Sorry.
cultural beliefs and values, is this one?
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, I think that there is a question about the indigenous people in Mexico and considering the climate justice. I think that this is a very important issue for us who live in Mexico. There are many communities of indigenous people who live in communities where climate change is really affected, and they, the most of the time, doesn't receive any support by the government or another kind of support. And I think we as research has some kind of responsibility to arrive and to help these communities. And some of them, or sometimes we have served like a bridge between what communities need and we as research we are like the voice of these people to the government to assist them. And I think that climate change justice is a very hard issue to be taken in account of our research.
If I could add something, I think what I have found in my short life is that the indigenous groups that I have come across seem to be one with nature. And so for me, it seems like a common theme in terms of the cultural beliefs, et cetera, is one with nature. And unearthing how they define that, I think, is the critical aspect of doing any type of research within the notion of responses to climate change.
I wonder if I could make a couple of points, please, and I know it's very difficult because I can't actually see everyone. I wanted to actually address the question that came from the Philippines about the different cultural beliefs and values and the responses to climate change. I'm aware from the questions that there are a number of people from Indonesia in the audience, and I'm wondering, Chair, if I could just share a couple of slides, would that be possible?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So I'll talk while I've been doing this. So I've been involved with I'm not sure how well this is going to work. I've been involved with a project for the last 2 years in Indonesia. It's funded half by the Indonesian government and half by the Australian, our DFAT, which is our Foreign Affairs, and it's about inclusive climate change and responses to climate change. And I just wanted to share two slides from a larger perspective, because when we talk about different philosophies or different cross-cultural sort of beliefs and values, sometimes there are groups that are left out. And so this research was focused on not just women, but women's grassroots climate advocacy groups. So these are women who are in their villages, and in Indonesia, in contrast to your study with the dairy farmers, most of the farmers are women. And they do the seed collecting. They experience firsthand the negative effects of climate change because it affects their livelihoods. It affects their capacity to earn an income to send their children to school. And this was sort of the background that in a lot of the literature, I mean, women are overly affected by climate change, but sometimes they're portrayed as victims. And so what this project did, well, it did a number of things. So it looked at policies and found that of all the policies on climate change in Indonesia, the words gender or women were only mentioned 7 times. And it was assumed that what was good for everyone was also good for women. And so what they did is they looked at a number of different groups. And for those of you from Indonesia, will see that it went all the way from east to west, and sort of ended up with these recommendations that there needs to be a gender responsive approach to adaptation, equal access, and more collaboration between the state government the national government in Indonesia, the various provinces, and the grassroots. I'll sort of stop there because I just sort of the point I wanted to make is that there is a lot of other research that is happening around cultural beliefs and values, and I think that there are country-specific approaches. Landslides in Indonesia and flooding is a devastating outcome for the people, and will continue to be so. I'll stop there because there might be comments. So.
Okay, thanks for your answer. And at time limit, we may not be able to answer all the questions, but we select some questions. There are 4 more. Can you see my screen? Yeah, so any ideas, feel free to discuss.
Maybe the second one, who is an alternative paradigm climate change. What we was learned in our research is the importance to consider the local knowledge or the indigenous knowledge to come to the research and to discuss about them. And we at research learn about this knowledge of the community. For us, this was very important to learn from the community, learn for the dairy farmers, learn for the agricultures, etc. I think this is a different point of view. Not only teach what books say, even though consider all other kind of knowledge.
May I add to that as well? I think it's really critical that we meet people where they're coming from. So for example, one of the things we have is changes in fish populations. And that means fisheries are impacted significantly. And that changes how the economy is shaped and tourism and all sorts of things like that. And I think in places where, especially in question number 4, they're talking about backlash and climate change denial, even among people who say they deny climate change is happening, they can't deny that the fish are dying, right? And maybe start from there. Start with what we can all agree with and in a language we're all on the same page with, and then build from there. To avoid some of the confrontation and argumentation, and really rather starting from what can we do about the fish dying, rather what can we do about the floods, what can we do about the droughts, rather than taking a more argumentative perspective.
Yeah, and any ideas about other questions?
Question number 2, will the alternative paradigm on climate change be taught in schools? That's a very complex question, because as long as you have a political entity that's going to be deciding what's being taught in school, and it is generally driven by Western thinking, Western philosophy, neoliberal, conservative thinking, then I just don't see a hope for that. I think that education in general has been totally disempowered. And in the United States, we teach to the test. We do not any longer teach to learn things, but to have good scores on standardized tests that are given either at the midterm or at the end of the year. And I think that in my work that's going to be published pretty soon on the notion of standards, there are political frameworks that influence the design of any standard that have nothing to do with learning and have nothing to do with teaching, but they have a lot to do with the advancement of certain political agendas. So as a good example in the United States, and I call it a gringo argument, and that is that evolution, the big fight between evolution and creationism. I'm from Nicaragua. I went to Catholic catechism class at 8 o'clock in the morning, and at 9 o'clock I went to evolution. And so I think that that argument is in certain countries, but it is driven by people who have political agendas within those countries. That's my piece. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So any other ideas? Okay, so I think that will be all for today. And thanks very much to all of our guest speakers. And if you have registered today's session, and we will also be sending you an email with all the contents of this webinars and the recording and other SAGE academic materials. And we'll also share the journal's homepage. So please feel free to visit the journal's website and click on the collections. Then you will find the special issue and we talk today, or scan the QR code as it's shown on the screen now. Okay, that's all for today once again, and thanks very much to all of our guest speakers for sharing with us the advance in our research of climate change education. And thanks everyone for joining us. Have a lovely day and see you next time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.